Hello, hello. Welcome all Belly Up Fantasy Football fans. Of course, as always, joined by Chris Dowhower, and I am Adam LaRue. Chris, how's it going?
Going pretty good. Definitely a little humid today outside. Glad I don't have training camp. I know we're talking about football news, but yeah,
Yeah.
definitely excited to kind of get into what's unfolding as training camp's kind of right around the corner.
Yeah, it's right there. I think we're going to get to start talking about a little bit of that stuff next episode. At least we'll have a lot more action in the football world in general come next time. So we're kind of in the dead of things, but still super excited. There's a lot to talk about. Just the things that have kind of slipped through the cracks, all the fun storylines throughout this off season that we haven't really gotten to dedicate a ton of time to. So many interesting things have happened that it's easy to forget some of the mid-tier stuff that could still have a very big impact. That being said, we do have a very big piece of recent news in the fantasy football world, and that is Terry McLaurin staying with Washington football team. I believe a 3-year extension. Is that correct?
Yes, 3 years,
Um,
70 million, I believe it is.
yeah, so take us through that. I know we had talked about kind of the belief that he might not be around for much longer, and that Dotson could have been someone who was intended to take his spot here in a year or two. Now, clearly, that won't be happening at least for 3 years. So yeah, what do you make of it? How does this impact things for his value as well as guys around him like Wentz, for instance?
I think this is a great for everybody that's involved. To be honest, I think it was a little bit kind of confusing that Washington seemed to go so high on Dotson, the guy who I definitely like coming out of Penn State. My counterpart, Dan Mater, is not nearly the fan, but that he is somebody who I thought they reached when they did take him in the first round a little bit high.
I
So you
agree.
kind of wonder the draft capital they were spending, is this kind of an AJ Brown situation that you kind of draft and replacement? Terry McLaurin though is a hell of a receiver. I know last year he kind of underachieved for some fantasy owners, but that wasn't on him. That was basically Tyler Heineke's balloon popped last year as the season kind of progressed, and you kind of saw this guy's not a really good quarterback. Terry McLaurin's an outstanding receiver, and I think that he's going to get back on track. This is going to help Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz hasn't had a legitimate target in probably about 3 or 4 or 5 years now. People always point to his injuries, kind of hit for his decline. Look at the receiving core that he had to throw to the Eagles the last couple of years. Look at the Colts receivers he had last year. Ty helped basically on fumes. So, and with that, Carson Wentz still put up in on ESPN's standard scoring 13th and a quarterback. So a guy that definitely can get the ball down the field a little bit. Terry McLaurin is a guy who is great in the inseam, great 15-yard, 17-yard routes. Carson Wentz can throw the ball down the field. So I think this is a match made in heaven. And as for Dotson, I know a lot of people were disappointed. Hey, you're not going to be necessarily at receiver one. That might not necessarily have to be a bad thing for this guy. I think he's more ideally suited for the slot position. I think he can
I
play
agree.
outside, but I think he can play kind of mix him around, move around. The guy who probably gets going to get hurt mostly in this situation, I think, is Curtis Samuel, a guy who's kind of is guaranteed money starting to get to the end of it. If he's not healthy for the substantial part of this year, he doesn't produce. They've had a lot of draft capital last couple of years in receiver. I think that's a guy who can kind of maybe move on from if you have him in dynasty leagues or anything like that. What's your comment?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's really interesting because to your point, they added De'Ami Brown as well last year, both Samuel and him in the same offseason. I think they probably project into relatively similar roles as well. So that's going to be an interesting piece as, there's not an extra spot on this receiver group opening up anytime soon. But yeah, I think this is a really interesting situation to happen for Wentz specifically because, like you said, this is the best receiver he's had in quite a while, and this is the best quarterback that McLaurin's had in quite a while. I definitely think that his longevity in Washington, as the starting quarterback there, is going to be interesting because how long is he, on a contract for? Is it 2, 3 years?
Who's that?
Wentz.
Samuel? Wentz. It's basically it's up to the team because they can kind of get out of his deal after the guaranteed money. He basically has about 3 to 4 years left on the deal itself. I mean, he signed a 6 year
Mhm.
extension, so it's
Yeah.
basically he's only been off the 1 or 2 years off the extension. I think he's into his contract.
Hmm.
It's about 4 years, but they control kind of the situation where they can eat a decent amount of money, but move over from his contract next
Hmm.
year and kind of if they get in the draft sweepstakes, maybe move on sooner than later. But I think Carson Wentz, to your point, has a kind of chance to succeed in the situation possibly.
Yeah, I absolutely think so, because I mean, if he can get to starting a quarterback level, that deal's not really that bad at all. I mean, it's what, like low to mid 20s, right?
Yeah,
Not
it's
bad at all.
about
That's
20,
great for
about
a
25
starting
million
quarterback.
for right now. That's
And
that's great. Yeah.
yeah, and again, as a Colts fan, obviously I've been through the Wentz thing, and it wasn't wasn't in love. However, I think it's a much different situation given the history of the quarterback position in Washington as of late versus what I've had for most of my life. They're desperate. They've had Heineke, the corpse of Alex Smith, and a bunch of other not very good. And Wentz is certainly again the best that McLaurin's ever had. So I think that could be a pair that sticks around for a little bit.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think Terry McLaurin will get back in discussion as one of the top elite receivers this year when he has a good quarterback to actually push the ball down the field consistently to him.
Yeah, I mean, Wentz's one of at least Wentz's strengths is pushing the ball down the field, and that's a strength that kind of lines up really well with McLaurin. I actually really do love that match. I think they can be pretty good together. Moving on, though, one of the other massive pieces of news in the football landscape, not necessarily the NFL, but of course, they all have ramifications with each other. College football is getting shaken up quite a bit with a couple teams from the Pac-12 trying to or going to move over to the Big Ten. Of course, earlier we had some of the moves from the Big 12 over to the SEC with Oklahoma and Texas. Now losing USC, as well as who was the other one?
UCLA.
Yes, USC and UCLA moving over to the Big Ten. Yes, moving. I don't know. That's interesting. It feels like we're moving a lot towards college, especially with NIL, and then now this. It feels like we're moving a lot towards college just being glorified a minor league. In all honesty, it feels like a lot of the whole regional things, the things that made college football like much different from the NFL, feels like they're fading. I don't know, Chris. What's your take?
Yeah, so I'm wondering how long college sports in general can hang on to this facade of their amateur athletics. Because I think this, we already seen the licensing, and even that I still think is still chipping from the players. The players are the people who generate the revenue. And I know that people argue about what about the golf team or what about the tennis team and how do they do with this? Well, they don't generate the revenue. I'm sorry, guys. This is America. This is how it kind of works. People who generate the money should be the ones who get to kind of spend the money to a degree. I think everybody kind of makes out in the situation, but I also think this should force teams, not just in the NFL, for example, but in NBA. A lot of these teams these leagues should have to reconsider the 18-year legal implement, because I think if these teams are going to be forcing you to go to college, and to your point, this is basically a glorified, minor league system. What's the difference? Why can't I go pro as 18? I'm a big proponent. I don't necessarily love the product on the field or on the floor with the younger guys out there because I think they have something polished. But I think it's where it takes coaches and actual ownership, deciding when guys play and don't play. But guys have a chance to earn your living at 18 years old, or kind of be an injury away from losing your career, should jeopardize those kinds of things if we're going to have situations that you're talking about where these power conferences are basically just realigning themselves so they can align themselves with money, and all these different presidencies of these universities are making bankroll. So if you're going to do that, then these players should be the ones capitalizing as well, in my opinion.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I definitely think it's going to be interesting seeing, especially some of the West Coast teams kind of, traveling to to Iowa or Nebraska or Wisconsin in the winter. That would be just feels weird, but it could be really.
Yeah, but I also think that's where scheduling and things come into play. I think if people play their cards right or smart, you don't necessarily schedule a UCLA game in Buffalo in the middle of December. So just kind of thinking about certain things where it's going to be kind of warmer, having that kind of a huge, region to kind of plan these games, I think is actually beneficial in some ways, where you can kind of actually plan around some of the weather that is going to come, whether it's going to be tornado season, hurricane season, things along those lines. You can actually move teams around, maybe possibly. I think that the kind of the days of these poor guys and ride the bus. Those days are over. These guys are sitting there on these nice airplanes, usually not,
especially
and
USC and UCLA.
Yeah, exactly. So they're not no woe is them athletes. I'm sorry, they're going to be okay.
Yeah. Now, as far as a ramification that may actually matter for our sake for fantasy football, what do you think happens kind of schematically here, right? So I do think that every conference for the last quite a few years has had their own, brand of football. I mean, you've kind of expected an air raid from the Big 12 for the most part. You've expected, a little more pro style from the SEC and Big 10. The Pac-12's been, on offense spread out in West Coast and not as air raid as the Big 12, but they're certainly not strong defenses either. So with that, do you think schools like USC, UCLA, Oklahoma, Texas are going to be able to kind of adjust to the style of play of those, other conferences that they're joining? And if so, that could be honestly a good thing for professional football because, those teams do bring in good talent. They're just, often not prepared for the NFL level.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't hurt to have some of the California quarterbacks playing in the Big Ten where the quarterbacks don't seem to be as good. So I definitely think, other outside maybe Ohio State, but even those quarterbacks, necessarily are top pros all the time. I think that's just something that could definitely help. I think the only thing that's really going to be hurt in this whole situation is kind of the competitiveness of the game itself and kind of the styles you're talking about. I think you're just going to kind of see a mutated version of, some different styles of offenses and defenses. There probably won't be the stylistic kind of differences that we've gotten accustomed to over, generations upon generation. I've gotten to kind of see that in my own time, in my own lifetime, where there's no wishbone offenses, for example, anymore. Even, Army and Navy, the ones that kind of held on to it forever, started kind of modernizing some of their running attacks. Mm-hmm. So that's something that you have to definitely see in football. But I think it's necessarily going to be, the best athletes, the best players, the best coaches are going to continue to win. So the guys who adjust, the guys who continue to put the guys in the best position to succeed are going to be great. Alabama was known for a long time for being a really good defensive team. Yeah, and then Nick Saban kind of adjusted where Alabama's defense isn't what it used to be. But offensively, they can score with anybody in the nation because they're not afraid to. So when you see an Alabama team scoring 40, giving up 30, they used to be blasphemy back in the day. But, that's not, those days are kind of over. So I think the football you see in college and in the NFL are going to be pretty much here to stay for a little while. It might force some teams to kind of, try to adjust to try to stand out in recruiting. That would be my only thing. I think the teams that are really going to hurt, though, is some of these lower teams. The USCs and UCLAs and the Ohio States are going to be just fine. What happens to Maryland? What happens to Rutgers? What happens to, these teams that already struggle to be anything as it was? They kind of get to the Big Ten pool, great, but then when it comes to recruiting, who's going to go play for you?
So, and Sans, Oregon, Stanford, maybe a couple other Pac-12 schools. The Pac-12 feels like it's in an awful spot now.
There shouldn't be even Pac-12. USC and UCLA were the Pac-12. We know Big Ten, the Rose Bowl. What was it? It was going to Rose Bowl, going to USC, going to LA Coliseum, and that's over. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a Big Two with, maybe we're nice to the Big 12 and let them hang around for a little bit longer. Maybe move Oregon, Stanford over to the Big 12, let them be the big schools over there. But I think the Power Five might be dead.
Oh yeah, I think those days are definitely in the cards. I was, I'm a Hurricanes fan, and they were in the Big East. The Big East is where in the NFL, not NFL, sorry, college football right now. Even the NFL right now, you can't find any guys coming from the Big East. But so yeah, I think that you see these big conferences that used to be known for certain teams. When you lose a Miami, you lose a Florida State, and then the ACC becomes a team that known for basketball and conference that kind of has the strength that brings with it. You're going to kind of lose different teams over the years, and now you're seeing this kind of adjust. I think the Pac-10 and the Big 12, what they're going to have to do is kind of combine, in my opinion, if you want any chance, because I don't see you getting any invites. You weren't getting any as it was, to the bowl. So I don't want to get hit with this topic too long, but I definitely think with you're talking about how it translates, it's going to make kind of watching some of these teams easier, I guess, on Saturday for us to scout kind of as fantasy guys. but it also might make it harder for some teams to kind of, or I shouldn't say that, teams might get lazy. I'm worried about where you have certain guys, as you talked about, where systems they relied upon, or certain coaching staffs, or different conferences they kind of always pick from.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'll just go to the SEC, for example, and just pick whatever guy in the SEC because that's the best guy in the SEC. I'll do that in the Big Ten now. I do think that gets kind of overrated, where I think there's guys that get kind of overlooked in other conferences just because you hear about the SEC and you hear how great it is, but it doesn't mean that guys can't play.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it overall it does feel like a blessing and a curse. I mean, there will be, a higher talent level in the two conferences, which is great because we'll get to see the best of the best against each other a lot. But for the good players who make it to other schools, it's going to be a lot harder for them to get those major opportunities that they were getting before.
And some of these teams are going to want to butcher themselves, where I think they're going to regret their move. Like the USC is struggling to pack. They haven't dominated Pac-10 or Pac-13 or Pac-12 recently. How are they going to do against Ohio State playing them every year?
Oh yeah, it's the same thing with Texas. And moving to the SEC, they've been struggling in the Big 12. How is this going to get any better? I guess Archie Manning's going to save the day. All right. Moving on, though, we're on to some hot topic issues. More directly in the NFL sphere, the fantasy football sphere. And the first of that, we're going to look over two running back rooms that I find really fascinating because they're the ones that, they're the most divided, but that often leads to some league-winning potential when you can, pick the right guy in these situations, especially if there is truly a right guy. Occasionally, it happens that these are the bell cow or the by committee instead situations that they look like right now. But something like Atlanta last year, if you happen to landed on Cordero Patterson, you got crazy value. So at any rate, the New England and the Seattle running back rooms I wanted to take a look at. We'll go with New England first. And what's fascinating here is that we've been down this road with New England for so long where it's hard to trust a New England back. But Harris has been pretty solid for the last couple of years, for one. And then for two, we don't have McDaniel anymore, which we don't have an offensive coordinator anymore. So what do you make of the New England running back room right now with Stevenson, with White coming back, like Harris, as I mentioned before, they drafted a couple guys. What do you make of the situation? Is this one where you're a little afraid of the volume getting even lower for Harris, or is this going to be another good year for him?
I'm not necessarily huge on Harris. I am a big Ramondre Stevenson fan, and I think that he is the running back that you want to own, particularly come playoff time in your fantasy leagues this year. I know that might be kind of maybe a hot take per se or whatever, but I think when you look at what he brings to the table, you talked about James White coming back. He's still kind of banged up, but he hasn't been cleared to return. You're not sure if he can start off the season on the PUP or not. This guy's 30 years old. I don't necessarily see the Patriots, figuring out a way that makes James White involved, but I do see Ramondre Stevenson as a 240-pound guy who can pass protect, can catch the ball out of the backfield, has nimble feet. You don't want to tackle him as the season progresses. You saw last year where him and Harris both had production where you could have played one of the guys as your RB, maybe 2 or 3, and play the other one in the flex. You weren't hurting necessarily having both those guys in your backfield. So I don't think Damien Harris is going to fall off the cliff. I don't want to go out there. But the touchdown production was very high last year. I think that's going to take a dip. I expect the Patriots throw the ball a bit better this year. I expect them to throw the ball much more this year than they did last year. And I have no intel for this, and I have more of a gut that I'm going with, so people can ridicule me and kill me as the season progresses if I'm wrong, and I'll take it and with it on the right in the chin. But I don't. I hate Eric, Judge, and I hate who's the other idiot that they hired, the defensive coordinator, Matt Patricia. If either one of those guys are actually touching the offense, God help us all. But
God help Mac Jones first and foremost.
Yes. But we saw Joe Judge, let's punt on 3rd down and 25, or 3rd and 5, I should say, last year on his own. Own 10-yard line because he didn't want to go for it. Yeah. So I hope that guy doesn't get the chance to touch the offense. But I think this is Matt Jones's offense, and I think Bill Belichick trusts Matt Jones, and just like we saw Tom Brady kind of have that, freelance of what he wanted his offense to be at certain times, where you can kind of call the offense, call the pace. I think you're going to see Matt Jones kind of be able to be unbridled and kind of use his mind and use his creativity on the field. I think you're going to see an offense that's curtailed to what he thinks should be called. I think he's going to have that freedom to kind of audible and check at the line, and I wouldn't be surprised if they go pace. I also think that Belichick isn't the reason, and people might also argue this, that they're running the ball all the time last year. I think that's part of the reason Josh McDaniels got kind of conservative over the last few years. This isn't something new for Josh McDaniels. I think that might kind of change for him in the Raiders. But with New England, I expect this offense to kind of revert back to more of a balanced offense. And that's what, Belichick has always historically been on offensively. They're willing to kind of be balanced offense, keep you kind of, and take a shot down the field. They're not afraid to throw the ball down the field and set you up with that play action. So I do think that Matt Jones is the guy that I like. And as running backs, I think Ramondre Stevenson, like I said, is the guy to own. Damian Harris, I think, is still going to have production as a value, but I think as the season progresses, remember, this guy isn't in the long-term plan probably for the Patriots. He's in the last year of his deal. He doesn't catch the ball particularly great out of the backfield. Not that he can't, but I think that we've seen some guys, that are dual threats out of the backfield that get utilized a little bit both. Rex Burkhead kind of pops to mind in my mind. When those guys can have, 3 or 4 catches, and also run the ball in New England, it's really valuable. So that kind of gives you a safe floor and give you a good ceiling as well.
Yeah, Stevenson could be a really good value this year. I mean, at worst case, we could be looking at something a little similar to what happened last year with A.J. Dillon. That feels pretty like a decent chance. And to your point, like as the season goes on, someone like him who is that big but also has some quickness, it's really hard to tackle someone like that once the season's kind of worn on a bit. Moving on to the other running back room, as I mentioned, Seattle. Obviously, it's the two big guys, Kenneth Walker and Rashad Penny. Rashad Penny kind of showed off that he does have some talent left after all the injuries the past 3-4 years, in that 5-game stretch at the end of last season. And then, regardless of that, the team goes and drafts Kenneth Walker just a couple months later, even after resigning Rashad Penny. So what do you make of that? I know we've talked about it before. I think we probably expect Kenneth Walker to be, the guy that ultimately, takes the job. But is this going to be a workhorse situation? Is this going to be a type of situation where just due to the sheer volume, both backs are going to have some fantasy viability, or what do you think here?
I think that what you saw in Denver last year is a good comparison. The Melvin Gordon, Javonte Williams is what you kind of expect in this backfield. I think Walker is definitely going to be mixed in there. You can spend a first-round pick for no reason on him. And then you talked about guys more explosive. Penny has a history of being banged up consistently. I got to see him being utilized 4, 5, 6 games in a row for me to actually believe that he's going to be the bell cow. So I think they're going to try to limit both those guys. Over the last few years, you've kind of seen Seattle not really give a guy since Marshawn Lynch the deep ball all the time. Even Chris Carson, they started using the other guys to kind of sprinkle in there with DJ Dallas or somebody else to kind of mix in. So I think that you're going to see a more even split where maybe Penny has more pass protection because he's a better pass protector right now than Walker is. Walker has to show can he catch the ball or not. If he can kind of utilize that skill and does demonstrate that, then that could be a huge opportunity for him to kind of get that third down opportunity. But right now, I think it's going to be a rotational thing, similar to, like I said, with Denver. I think you're going to have both guys who can be plays, and I think you're going to see teams going to commit to running the ball, obviously. And with the receivers that they have, they're going to keep you honest because it's going to be hard. People might crap on Drew Lock and Geno Smith, and I can too, but DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, I can't crap on. So it's going to be, you have to pay attention to those guys, even if you're trying to stop their offensive line improvement. I think it's also going to help. So put all those things in play. I think Walker is a must own. I'm just shocked how people still are kind of questioning where his value is going to be this year. And I think Penny's a guy you can have on your team as a flex option as well.
Yeah, no, I think I probably land in a similar sphere. I mean, what it feels like is happening here is as you said, they'd be insane to trust Rashad Penny. Like, they'd be absolutely insane, not because the talent's not there, but because he's never been consistently healthy. So to just trust that magically this season's going to be the one, without having any backup, it would be, again, insane. And then just looking at the roster, like kind of where the strengths are, this feels like a team that's going to run a ton, and they're going to try to run some play action off of that. The one thing that we've seen from Drew Lock is that he does have a pretty good arm, and that he's pretty aggressive. I mean, for a guy that has thrown the ball deep and failed a lot of times, he keeps doing it. So that I think they'll probably see them just try to run it a lot and use, their incredible DK Metcalf, who's an athletic freak and huge, and Tyler Lockett, who's pretty fast himself. They've got they've got some very viable deep options here. They've got, plenty to be afraid of in the run game. They've finally upgraded the offensive line a little bit. I think you are going to see, again, them probably use the run game to open up some deep shots just here and there.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say with Drew Lock is he was not aggressive last year. I don't know what that was. That was him.
Yeah, last year he was not, but we've seen it from him more often than not, and we didn't see him play much last year. I think last year could be kind of the same situation that we've seen with Tua, in that at any given time he was a couple plays away from getting taken out, so he was probably playing a little more conservative than he would like otherwise.
So, Adam, real quick before we move on, I had two backfields I was going to ask some questions about, but do you want to take a quick break for Manscaped?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's split it up halfway through the backs. So, again, a message from our sponsor, Manscaped.
Hey, you. Yeah, you. Got bush? You definitely do if you haven't tried the best products from our sponsor today, Manscaped. Taking control of your bush is important. These products are so good, you're going to be showing pride in your new bush-free yard. It's a fact that you will have the best-kept nutsack on the cul-de-sac. Save big and be the most hygienic version of yourself by using the discount code BELLYUPFANTASY for 20% off and free shipping at Manscaped.com. Whether you're looking to go bald like an eagle or just in need of a safe trim, Manscaped is dedicated to helping you level up your full body grooming game. The grooming package I highly recommend is the Performance Package 4.0. Inside this package is the Lawnmower 4.0. This electric trimmer is a bush worst nightmare. With a Performance Package purchase, you get 2 free gifts, the Shed Travel Bag and the patented high-performance reduced chafing Manscaped Boxers. They have a bunch of other products on their website too to help you maximize your confidence and grooming game. So that's 20% off and free shipping when you use the promo code BELLYUPFANTASY at Manscaped.com. It's time to level up your game from the Amazon to the Amadong with the ultimate bushwhacking tools from Manscaped. So one more time, that's 20% off and free shipping when you use the promo code BELLYUPFANTASY at Manscaped.com today. Hey.
Thank you so much to Dan, and thank you so much to Manscaped for sponsoring the show. We definitely super, super appreciate it. All right, so, Chris. Let's hear these backfields.
Yeah, so one of the questions I think, we have to look at every stone unturned looking for fantasy value. So in the backfields is the Houston Texans. I think this is a backfield that has a lot of different discussions, points going on. I was curious to see what your take is. Is there value in this backfield? Is this a backfield that I should be drafting out of? Or should I be kind of just, waiting and seeing? What's your take?
I don't mind a flyer on a Marlon Mack, but I think overall, if I can get him towards the back end of a draft, then I'm happy with that. But overall, it's not one that I'm super interested in getting into. I don't think that the efficiency is really going to be there. We saw last year, outside of a handful of games, it was hard to play backs even when they were getting volume from this offense. It's just a difficult situation, again, because the offense as a whole isn't very good. But as of right now, I think Mack is where I'd want to go. But even then, I'm a little concerned because we just haven't seen much of him since that injury. I mean, he had like 20 attempts last year or something, not very many. It's a pretty difficult backfield to pick into, but I think he would be my take.
Yeah, I mean, I look at – so just a real quick question about that. Do you think that the movie upgrades offensively for the Texans might help a little bit? They did add – whether Mechie comes back or not, we're still to be determined. but they added a green and an interior for offensive line. They kind of reshuffled some guys, so they have made some additions to that offensive line that was putrid last year, as you kind of alluded to. Rex Burkhead did have value towards the last part of the season. And he still resigned as well. It's a name that hasn't been talked about, so that's why I was kind of curious. I hear a lot about the kid from Florida, Damian Pierce. A lot of people are huge, high on him. You being a dynasty guy, I was kind of curious to see what your take was. Marlon Mack is a guy I liked because of his talent when he was with the Colts, but as you pointed out, we haven't seen him in a couple of years. And Rex Burkhead was the guy last year. So I'm kind of curious to see, is this a team that people were willing to spend draft capital, or even, will you take a shot in that backfield, and who would it be? So yours is Marlon Mack. I tend to agree with you. I think if I was to take one, it'd be Marlon Mack. Right now, there's so many different guys that are undervalued. I'm not probably taking Marlon Mack on that shot, but I do think that if I was, I've only got 3 or 4 running backs, and I'm like, crap, I need another running back option, that maybe that's a guy that maybe you take a shot on.
Yeah.
The other one was another backfield that's a little bit, was productive last year, but it has a lot of different moving pieces, and that's the Washington Commodores backfield. Gibson was one of the top guys. He's returns this year. We've heard that Christian McCaffrey hype, year in, year out, not necessarily this year. But, what is your kind of prognosis? They added a running back in Brian Robinson in the draft out of Alabama. They brought back, J.D. McKissick. So, is Gibson still one of those guys as an RB2 value, and is there value in his Washington backfield?
I think yes, but I think his days are numbered. He is not at all someone I would want to touch in Dynasty, for instance. I think he can hold off Brian Robinson fine, and I don't think that there's much value to be had on the receiving end in the running back room over there anyways. McKissick, I think, actually was probably in for a down year. However, the Brian Robinson pick makes me kind of feel as if that they will be moving off of Gibson, when they can. He has had some injuries. He hasn't developed as much as a runner as you would kind of have wanted. He definitely hasn't developed as much of a pass blocker to become the receiving threat that I think a lot of people imagined he would be, given that was his college position for a time. So I don't know. He still feels like a back that has a lot of potential that just hasn't quite been reached yet. And Washington could be positioning themselves to move on from that.
What's your take on Brian Robinson? Is he a guy for Dynasty that I'm looking at, maybe even to add as soon as this year, or am I kind of taking a wait and see on him?
I think it depends on value. To be honest with you, I don't quite remember what his ADP is in Dynasty at the moment. But he's certainly someone that I do think has a future in the league. It's just kind of tricky because he doesn't have immediate value, but he also was, I believe, either a senior or a redshirt senior, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, he is a bit up there as far as a rookie goes anyways, again, if I'm not mistaken. So that makes things a little tricky. I wouldn't, spend too much on him, but I mean, if I can get him on the cheap, then I wouldn't be opposed to it. I do think he has some talent.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of overhype or rhetoric coming out of Ron Rivera's mouth when he alluded to the Carolina backfield back in the day of D'Angelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart and how they were kind of productive. You had Michael Tolbert kind of thrown in there as also a guy that was utilized in that backfield. Mm-hmm. I think you're going to see them try to replicate that, but the production will not be replicated.
Well, they also said that Antonio Gibson was going to replicate Christian McCaffrey last year.
They did say that.
They did say that. So, he's maybe not a coach that I'm going to trust for that type of thing.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily trust him either. But I do think that the one thing that seems to come out of, it's still early, but we've heard a lot of rhetoric coming out of the Washington team, is that Brian Robinson is going to be the short yardage guy, probably the red zone guy when it comes to the those goal line touches. I alluded to Michael Tolbert as a guy back then, back in the day, where a guy had value because he scored touchdowns, but basically that's all he could do. I wouldn't be surprised if Robinson has some similar hammer role in this backfield. Gibson kind of gets more of the in between, gets a couple catches here, a couple handoffs here or there. McKissick's not going anywhere. Definitely the third down back. Overall, I think there's some value, but I think Gibson's where he's going right now cannot be taken. I think this is a guy that you're hoping at best to be a flex option, and I think right now you can't even guarantee that. Robinson's the guy I do like kind of moving forward. Gibson's been banged up the last couple of years. Doesn't have the greatest vision. You kind of talked about that. Hasn't really shown improvement with that. Has some fumble issues as well. So put all those things together. A team that can't lose this year. Ron Rivera loves to get. They call him, Riverboat Ron. I don't buy that crap. He's not aggressive. He's not taking shots. I think he gets conservative and gets scared. So I expect Washington to be very turnover. Trying to limit the turnovers between the backfield, guys getting penalized in the sense if you be the guy that gets the fumble. So I think Gibson's leash is really short, and a guy that I would probably move on to later if I could in Dynasty.
Yeah, I think I agree. Just an aside, because I think it's hilarious, just how he managed to get that nickname because of the one game where he was aggressive because his job was on the line, and the nickname just stuck, despite that was the exception, not the rule. He did it because he was going to lose his job if he did not.
Yes,
and it happened one time for 1 week, and someone in the media called him that, and we never heard the end of it.
I know. It's ridiculous.
Yes. I just again.
Great point, Adam. That's a great point, though. I love that. That's so true.
Another piece of hot topic information that I wanted to talk about was wide receiver Julio Jones, who last year, not his year. He's an older receiver, an all-time great, just a very talented receiver, but not his year last year between the recurring hamstring issues, which have, been a thing for a little bit now, and really not even being that great when he was on the field. But, he was pretty dominant when he was on the field the season prior with the Falcons. So it's kind of interesting to watch where he's going to go, because I don't think a resurgence, if he's able to stay healthy, is that out of the question. He's been linked to a few teams now. We heard some potential insider information from Dan last week that he thinks it's going to be Tampa. There was a report earlier today that Green Bay is the quote-unquote betting favorite for Julio Jones. Of course, he's been linked to the Colts because of Matt Ryan. He's been linked to a handful of other wide receiver needy teams. So, Chris, what do you think, if anything, Julio Jones could have left in the tank? And two, where do you currently lean as far as a guess as to where he may land?
The first question, I hope Julio Jones has something left in the tank. I don't want his career to be over, but I was also very soft with a guy named Calvin Johnson. I loved Calvin Johnson, Megatron, and watching him kind of as his years progressed, getting those lower leg injuries and never being kind of the same, and always kind of hoping one day he'll be back, I wonder if Julio, his kind of best days are behind him. Does he have something he could do if he got a chance and kind of quote-unquote stayed healthy? I think what we saw A.J. Green do last year in Arizona is probably what you're looking at, if that's the case. I think Julio could be even more dominant than that, but I can't say I've seen that. And last year, I was definitely looked like a shell of himself out there. I know he was kind of banged up, but he did not get separation when he's on the field. He didn't look like the Julio Jones that we know as a thoroughbred stallion. But guy's still 6'4", uses his body, so if he can, stay healthy for a couple of games, could produce to a degree. Having said all that, where do I think that he could wind up? I think Green Bay is the team I would not bet on, because people kept talking about Green Bay last year and OBJ going to Green Bay and everybody going to Green Bay. When has Green Bay signed a receiver, people? When have they sat there and gone out and got anybody that you expected them to get, or draft anybody you expected them to draft? Green Bay does what they want to do at receiver. I'm going to go with probably Dan. I don't know if he has an inside tip or not, but I do think that the Julio Jones, Tom Brady seems to make the phone call. It seems that you answer and you come. I think Chris Godwin's injuries kind of being downplayed a little bit too much, especially fantasy. Talk about some guys that we need to talk about, where their ADP is right now. It's not a guarantee this guy's going to be back, anytime soon. You're hoping a midseason return, maybe down the stretch. You're not really sure. So you put those things into play. No Gronk, no outside real receiver. You have a lot of slot receiver options Tampa Bay with no other outside guy other than Mike Evans, maybe Perriman. So there's opening and potential for Julio Jones there. I can see that as a good fit. I wish your Colts would be interested, but they've also been a team that's similar to Green Bay every year. Everybody wants them to get somebody or sniffs around somebody. They don't get anybody. I don't know if Julio's going to get a shot because I also think Julio thinks he should get paid a little bit. And that's the part where I'm really curious how much of his pride is he willing to eat? Because don't forget, he didn't play for chump change last year in Tennessee. While he didn't produce, he didn't pay for – this guy always was about his money. So I got to see that he's actually going to come and play for a team that's willing to not, maybe pay him $1 million or $2 million. I'm not really seeing any team that's obvious out there.
Yeah, that's a good point. It is weird. For a lot of these veteran receivers that are still out there, for instance, I still wouldn't be that shocked if T.Y. Hilton ends up back on the Colts somehow, some way. It feels like an inevitable thing that's just going to happen. And yeah, Julio Jones is a weird one. Green Bay would be super cool, but I also don't really think it's going to happen. Definitely one of my favorite players to have watched the last 15 or so years. So really hope he does land on his feet somewhere, but it's going to be tough.
I was going to say, if you want to throw just, a possible who knows if this could hit, why not bet on the Rams getting them?
Yeah, I mean, they do they do seem to just be adding guys. So that would be an interesting one. All right, so I want to jump into some fun questions, kind of based on some other hot topics that I've seen from around the league as of late or throughout the offseason. We're going to talk some quarterbacks here first. My first question to you, Chris, is who will score more fantasy points this season between these two star quarterbacks who lost their star receiver, which is Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, Rodgers losing Devontae and Mahomes losing Tyreek Hill.
Let's see. My crystal ball tells me I'm going with Patrick Mahomes. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is going to fall off a cliff like a lot of people are prophesying. He's still going to be a hell of a quarterback. This guy's still a veteran and read defenses in his sleep. But Patrick Mahomes had a down period last year for a part of the season. His down part of the season, his funk, he's still a top 5 quarterback. So put all those things together, added some pieces. I don't love the weapons they had around him, but what I do like is when Patrick Mahomes is feeling comfortable, knows where he's going with the ball, they'll be fine. So I think Mahomes is still going to be one of those top 3 guys, top 5 guys. I think Aaron Rodgers is going to be a guy that's, you're hoping finishes in the top 10 to top 12. But I think it's a guarantee. So Mahomes is definitely my guy. How about you?
Yeah, I think I would agree. It's just an interesting situation. Tyreek Hill was a special talent, and so is Devontae, obviously. And so are both quarterbacks. That's why the conversation's interesting.
Difference for me is that Andy Reid's pass happy. Green Bay showed you last year that their pace was slower. They're one to kind of grind it out. So that's where I have a little concern where the offense wasn't necessarily high-octane offense, and they're trying to get as many plays as they possibly can out there.
Yeah. Well, and the other unspoken difference so far is one of them still has an elite receiving option in Travis Kelce.
That's a big one. And look at the quarterbacks that you're playing against and the teams you're playing against. You just score points for the Chiefs. Green Bay, Aaron Rodgers might just show up and, against Chicago, against Detroit. What do you really got to do?
All right, so we have another quarterback question. This one I think is actually a lot more difficult. We'll call that other one just your warm-up question. Who starts more games in 2022 between Marcus Mariota and Kenny Pickett?
I'm going to go with it's Marcus Mariota. There's a lot of Marcus Mariota hate, okay?
I know.
I understand that the guy didn't light it up for Tennessee. However, when you look at his stats and what he did, it's not much different than what Ryan Tannehill did. And Ryan Tannehill's been a top 12 to 15 quarterback the last few years.
He was just worse in the red zone. That's about it.
That's about it, right? But did he have A.J. Brown throwing the ball too? So I think that might help a little bit. So when you have Kyle Pitts and you have Drake London, a guy who's 6'5" and a slot receiver. You have Brian Edwards, another 6'4" receiver. You have plenty of guys who are big. You have Arthur Smith, who kind of got Ryan Tannehill where he is in his career again. I think Marcus Mariota has potential to be a sneaky fantasy guy this year to have on your team. He runs.
And he looked really explosive for the Raiders.
He did. Exactly. And it was only one game, but he did look explosive, and he was utilized for his running. Atlanta's bad. They play in a dome. Put all these things together, usually that's good news for quarterbacks' fantasy productions. And I don't think Atlanta has any illusions who they are, but they're going to be feisty just like they were last year. I don't see them making a downgrade as a return from losing Matt Ryan. In fact, I think it's an upgrade because I think Mariota fits the fact that they can actually move around and create some a little bit more. And they can use him in RPOs and actually some more actions that they probably would appreciate to get some of the better plays than Matt Ryan. Nobody's worried about Matt Ryan holding it and taking off. So I do think Mariota's the guy. I think Pickett's is right now is QB3 for Pittsburgh. A guy who I 35 years old, rookie, but I know that the clock should be ticking. But I don't think that he's going to be starting anytime soon because Pittsburgh has playoff aspirations. Mr. Trubisky's, I think, is just as good, if not better. And I hate Mr. Trubisky, but there's no reason for him to be playing over him. So Pickett, to me, isn't going to be a guy you're going to see anytime soon unless Pittsburgh's season just collapses on itself. Yep. How about you?
No, I think I agree. I think I probably assume Pickett will get on the field a little quicker than you do. I think I feel pretty confident that we'll see him by about the midway point. That being said, though, I feel pretty decent that unless there's an injury that comes up, that Mariota should start throughout the season. It's interesting to me because I've seen a bunch of belief that Ritter's going to overtake him very quickly. And again, I just don't see it from Ridder, and I really, really want to because the story there is so compelling, with everything he did at Cincinnati. But at the end of the day, he is just not an accurate passer of the football. He's not a natural thrower of the football, I don't think. Like his form didn't look natural to me at all. And we've talked about this before, but that's something that you can work on a ton. And we've very rarely seen it actually pan out to where when you get pressure or you're forced into a decision quickly, that everything you've trained yourself to fix doesn't just go immediately out the window. Really, Josh Allen is the only example. And even then, you'll see some funky things from him sometimes. But he's largely fixed his issues. And that's just really tough to do. It's going to be an uphill battle for Ridder to even make it that far. So I don't see him passing Mariota anytime soon, personally.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, look, I think the kid's a winner. I think he's a hard player. I think he does a lot of different things that you kind of like. But when you look at the skill set, maybe you say his arm's stronger than Mariota's, but what does he do that's better? Doesn't throw more accurate ball, as you alluded to. He's not more athletic. So what does he do that's better that he's going to beat this guy out to play? And then you add the fact that I don't think this guy really reads defenses all that well. Now, I don't think Smith asks you to read defenses like super complicated, but I do think that you've seen, in Cincinnati, that was kind of something that you could definitely disguise coverages, and he wasn't really knowing what to kind of check to or what to audible to. And when you have throws that are tick late in the pros, at the pick six the other way. So I think there's a lot of things that Arthur Smith won't put up with, particularly as a rookie. So I don't think Ridder is going to touch that field this year, unless there's an injury or the team's just totally awful.
So we spoke earlier about the New England running back room. So now we're going to talk about Josh McDaniels and his new offense on the Raiders. Specifically, we're going to talk about Josh Jacobs. So we're going back to our running back talk. Excuse me. So Josh Jacobs, throughout his young career as a former first-round pick running back, over 3 seasons has averaged 280 touches per season, which is why he's been valuable in fantasy, because even if the efficiency hasn't been there, there's just not many backs in the league that get that kind of volume anymore. And that's been his average through his career so far. So I'm going to ask you, Chris, and I have a feeling I know your answer, but I'm going to ask you anyways. Are you thinking over or under that mark in 2022?
I think you're going to see under that mark. Because I just think that Josh Jacobs hasn't been healthy very consistently, and I think that his days in the backfield could be numbered. Last year of his deal, they didn't pick up his option, So that's pretty obvious that when you're running back, they're going to pick up your option. We're probably not keeping you or paying you. That could be successful for fantasy things because sometimes they might just run you to the ground and use you up. I'm in between where I think Josh Jacobs is an RB1 is definitely not something you can debate. But where he's going ADP-wise, where he's coming in a fourth round or so, if Josh Jacobs is your third running back or even that's a hell of an option. And I think that beginning of the season, you're definitely feeling confident. Drake got hurt towards the end of the season last year. You haven't really brought huge competition. I know that you have Zero White, the kid that people like a lot because he kind of runs physical, and I think he's going to take Jacobs' spot. Josh McDaniels doesn't play rookies very often. Check the Patriots. How does that work out for the running backs that rookie year? So I do think that this isn't something you're going to be rushed to see Jacobs get kind of phased out. Now, as the season progresses and if they're not contending, yeah, I can see that the Raiders should be a pretty good team this year. So I think the only thing you're really worried about for Jacobs is that you're still going to see kind of a rotation of three different guys. So it will be kind of a, you'll have your early down, Sony Michel probably roll. You'll probably the days of catching the ball last year people got excited about. Josh Jacobs catch the ball again. Bye. Say goodbye to that. That's not going to happen anymore. The only hope you have is Josh McDaniels remembers that you don't have to have one running back, only do one thing. They can be used in different things, but that hasn't happened in the last couple of years, so I don't know.
Yeah, it definitely looks like a situation where Josh Jacobs' value has kind of dropped, but his ADP has dropped even further, to your point. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. He is a talented player, and if anything, maybe a little bit less volume, given the injuries, as you mentioned, could probably help his efficiency a little bit. Maybe if he's not
be good. Devontae Adams is going to help a lot.
That's the other thing. We've preached a lot on this show. You want running backs on good offense. At the end of the day, it's pretty easy to just stack the box and terrorize running backs when the offense is bad. But when the quarterback's good and the passing game's going, they're just going to let you run. They're just going to let it happen.
I'm not going to say this is going to happen for sure, and this is kind of a bit meanie as last year. But look at Leonard Fournette's success in Tampa Bay last year, and think about what Josh Jacobs could do possibly in that Raiders offense.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're gonna actually get to the finish probably a few minutes early here, but I have one last question for you, Chris, and that is in the upcoming celebrity boxing match. Who is your favorite between Adrian Peterson and Le'Veon Bell?
This is a no-brainer for me.
I think
AP all day.
Yes.
If you're beating your kid, you have no problem beating some dude down. AP is a crazy dude. I just hope he doesn't have to switch with him. Le'Veon Bell better watch himself. Dude about to eat himself out of the league last couple of years. I think he's going to get himself knocked out.
Yeah, I think I would lean Peterson pretty heavily as well. I mean, you think about they both lost some quickness, weren't quite able to produce like they were able to prior. Adrian Peterson was still a very valuable, at least power back up until the end. He was still at both the same size, more or less. I mean, they're both.
Who do you trust working out?
Yeah, exactly. They were both around 6'1", 220, more or less, ballpark. And Adrian Peterson kept his power a lot longer than Le'Veon Bell did. At least on the football field, that's how it worked out. I'm going to wager that it's going to be about the same, regardless of age, that Adrian Peterson's got more power in his body than Le'Veon Bell does at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Le'Veon showed you, like I said, I think he's damn near ate himself out of the league last couple of years. There's no way AP's going down. Mm-hmm. I a couple questions for you, though, Adam, for a little rapid fire before we jump out.
Yep.
So the first one I wanted to kind of throw at you is this Joe Burrow love. Do you think that Joe Burrow is going to be a top 10 quarterback this year in fantasy? Is he a QB1, or is Joe Burrow's kind of anointing a little ahead of time?
I do think he will be a QB1, but I think he is getting overrated quite a bit as well. I think he will finish as a top 12, 10 quarterback. But I could absolutely see him being on the back end of that. And especially on the dynasty side of things, I think he's getting incredibly overvalued, to be honest with you. that he is it feels like is in that tier with, he's not quite in the tier of the Josh Allens, the Patrick Mahomes, but he's getting kind of in there with Herbert and Lamar. And at least from a fantasy football perspective, on the field, sure, Joe Burrow can be in that conversation. He might even be better. At least he has more playoff success. So I'm not going to debate who's the better football player. But at the end of the day, from a fantasy football perspective, the upside to me, whether dynasty or redraft, is much higher with either of those two guys. So that's kind of an argument that's happening to me just doesn't make any sense.
Next one is for dynasty and also for redrafts. I want your comment for both of these. Trey Lance or Justin Fields?
That's easy. I'll go with my heart. I'll go with my rankings at the time that they were drafted, and that's Justin Fields. I know that Justin Fields will be the week 1 starter. Until it is said from Shanahan's mouth that Trey Lance is starting week 1, I'm not guaranteeing it. I'm not saying that I don't think it's the likely thing, because I think it is the likely thing. I think he's going to have to own up to that pick. But as long as Jimmy G's on the roster, I'm not ruling it out. I just can't rule it out. It's hard for me to, because they've put themselves in a very strange position at the quarterback position. Give me Fields. I think Fields clearly had some growing to do, and the Bears are clearly mismanaging that situation. But there has been inklings of him being an NFL passer at times, both in college, and he's had some good plays at the very least at the NFL level throwing the football. And I don't feel like I can say the same for Trey Lance.
This is my last quarterback question for you, Adam. For dynasty purposes, Matt Jones or any quarterback from this year's draft?
So the current rookies?
Any of the rookies from this year's draft, any single one of them versus Matt Jones, who would you rather have for dynasty purposes right now?
Mac Jones. He's the only one that I feel confident in saying 6 years from now, Mac Jones will be a starter at the NFL level. He's the only one that I can say that. Actually, my personal dynasty philosophy is I only care 3 years out anyways. I can confidently say Mac Jones will be a starter in 3 years, and I can't confidently say that about any quarterback that is a rookie currently.
Amen.
All right, cool. Chris, what's the schedule of the Belly Up MDFF show going on right now?
Yeah, we have special guest Lauren Carpenter joining us this week, and we continue to do our division profiles. And then we're taking a little break the following week. So definitely come in, continue to have great guests, and stay tuned this week, Thursday night, 10 o'clock. I think that we're having our show.
Awesome. Yes, definitely go check out the show. It's always really good. I was on a week or two ago, and it was a very fun time. Always like going over there. One last thing, guys, if you are interested in playing some fantasy football with Dan, I just presume with Chris again this year, we'll be doing the 3rd annual Belly Up Bowl. It'll be hosted on Sleeper. It's a best ball league, so you just make your picks and then you're kind of good. All of the proceeds go to Alex's Lemonade Stand, so it's for a really
great
good
cause.
Yeah, really good cause. We've so far donated $2,400 to donate St. Jude's and Alex's Lemonade Stand over the past 2 years. St. Jude's was the first year. Alex's Lemonade Stand was last year. So it's our second year with Alex's Lemonade Stand. Again, super excited. So go to bellyupfantasysports.com/bellyupbowl, or if you just go to bellyupfantasysports.com, there's a little tab that will say Belly Up Bowl, and go check it out. Go get started. It costs, I think we did our donations at around $20 last year.
$20, yes.
Yeah. Cool. So definitely go check that out. And thank you guys so much for listening. We truly appreciate it. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Hopefully we'll have a lot more news in store around then, as I believe some of the earlier training camps start around then. We'll catch you then.